Hi everyone, I'm Kate Jinks. I'm a programmer at the Melbourne International Film Festival. First, I'd like to acknowledge that I am on the traditional land of the Kulin Nation and pay my respects to elders past and present. This is, was and always will be Aboriginal land. MIFF Talks are presented in partnership with the University of Melbourne, and I am delighted to be hosting today's Folk Heroes, documenting artists and icons. We're going to take a look at 3 films in this year's festival that do just that, and I'm joined by the directors of those films from far-flung locations. Not so far-flung is Matthew Walker. He's the director of I'm Wanita, a documentary about Australia's Queen of Honky-Tonk, and he joins us from Sydney. Hi, Matthew.
Okay.
Cheryl Dunn is the director of Moments Like This Never Last, a portrait of the late artist Dash Snow, and she joins us from New York.
How you doing?
Hi, Cheryl.
How you doing?
And I'm well. I'm so excited to be talking about your beautiful film today. And lastly, we have the directors of Karen Dalton, In My Own Time, about the late folk singer Karen Dalton. We've got Richard Peete and Robert Yapkowitz, also in New York. Hi.
Hello.
Hello. Good to be here.
Do you want to tell the audience which is Richard and which is Robert?
The one with the beard?
1, 2, 3. I'm Rob.
Perfect. Well, all 3 of your films kind of extend far beyond the artist documentary, which is a particular love of mine, kind of portraiture of different people making wildly unique work. And your films all go to personal and sometimes quite uncomfortable places, but they all have a very deep sense of empathy for the subject, which really comes through. And I wanted to start with you, Cheryl. You were documenting Dash for many years before his death, and there's so much of that incredible empathetic footage in your film, and I thought it would be remiss if I didn't ask you about how your life became intertwined with his. How did you meet him, and why did you start documenting him?
I was kind of somewhat entrenched in the graffiti world in New York. I dated a writer, and I kind of started shooting a lot of pictures and kind of marveled at this whole network of kids that were in cities all over the world, tagging up everything. And so I thought, I should just start documenting. I want to someday make a film about graffiti writers. So I just started interviewing people. And Dash I met at this exhibition at Deutsche Projects called Street Market, which was Barry McGee and Stephen Powers and Todd James. And he was 18, 19, and he was kind of hanging around. He was just such a magnetic, magical kid. And he always walked around with like stack of Polaroids like this. And he'd be like the excitement of a kid, like showing you what he made, that was his energy. And so I just started filming him, and then I subsequently was curating a show there called Session the Ball, and I was one of 3 curators. And I said, we got to put Dash in this movie, in this exhibition, and no one really knew who he was. So he got to do a big grid of his Polaroids, and I was also an artist in that show, and I made this 2-channel video installation of like this kid that's up all night destroying New York, and like a classic hedge fund guy that's, couldn't sleep, like destroying New York in the day, and like kind of pit them together. So after that, I just filmed him whenever he had a show, or we would go in this abandoned building next to my house and just, tag it up and stuff. And he was just like my little buddy. I think that, he was excited about what he was doing. And that was exciting to share for him as this, young guy.
Was he ever
so,
reluctant?
It was like, what?
Oh, I was going to ask, was he ever reluctant to be filmed, or did he kind of not think that this was going to become a project, about him? Of course, he wouldn't have known that at the time, but was he always sort of willing to be filmed?
Yeah. He was a photographer, and he documented things. And I think when you are that person, when someone to do that, especially someone that like has knowledge and excitement about I think there's always in my experience has always been an openness. I mean, when people ask me to take my picture, I don't really want my picture taken, but I always other people, so I do it, So at that age, definitely not. I mean, later in his career, when he got so much attention and he just kind of wanted to hide out, then things changed. Yeah.
And what about with you, Matthew? You're the other director in today's panel who got some one-on-one time, quite a lot of it, with your documentary subject, Wanita. How did your life become entwined with hers? She's another very magnetic figure.
I got a phone call from a old school friend, actually, who was kind of in the country music world up in Tamworth a little bit, and she'd just been talking to someone, a guy called Butto, who now runs the Airlie Beach Music Festival, and he'd kind of been a bit of a supporter of Wanita. He'd helped finance her last album, and I think he was just throwing around over a few beers, someone needs to make a doco about this woman. Do you know anyone, Nadine? And she just gave me a call and said, do you want to come up and film this person called Wanita, a country singer in Tamworth, over a few days during the Tamworth Music Festival? And it kind of just fitted into my schedule and stuff, and I just kind of went, yeah, righto. And I just kind of thought, it's kind of one of those totally random things that might actually just turn into something. Who knows? I didn't know what it was. I assumed it was going to be like a promo video for a country music star, but it became apparent, within about a minute that it wasn't going to be a traditional promo thing for a country music star. And, and Wanita, she likes me saying the bit where she sacked me after the first hour because we weren't getting in amongst it enough. And it's just, all these different people started kind of throwing in their two bobs worth about Wanita and what she really is, and I've got the real story. And Wanita was happy to let them all speak at length, and I just kind of woke up the next morning and thought, like shit, there's something going on here. There's lots and lots of sides to this, and it really kind of resonated with me in a funny kind of way. And I just kind of went, yeah, I'll kind of run with this, see where it goes.
Yeah, it's a
Was
real
that the question?
right place. Yeah, it's so interesting. It's such a lot of people who set out to make a documentary about an artist kind of, know a lot about them or want to elevate their platform or something, but it's so interesting that this was almost happenstance. It's fate, it sounds like, you and Wanita.
Yeah, happenstance and maybe fate was the main kind of director of the whole thing. It was totally kind of embracing happenstance, like almost as a dogma, just kind of let chaos rule the whole time and not try and push it in any particular direction or kind of celebrate the fact that it didn't go in ways that you thought it might go.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you and Wanita are on the same page in that instance then.
Yeah, we are kind of on the same page in that instance, and then we're both lucky enough to have a whole lot of people around us who are a lot more sensible and, and can make these things actually happen. My producer, Carolina and Claire, and Wanita had Glennie, Ray and Archer, and yeah.
Yeah. I'd love to talk a bit later about, having other people speak for your documentary subject and that sort of thing. Robert and Richard, when I first contacted you, Richard, about your film, I really wanted to see a copy of it very quickly. And Richard, you implored me to listen to Karen's music if I hadn't already. But of course, I was a big fan of her music while I was getting in touch. But I felt from that conversation with you and then through the film that perhaps the idea behind this film really is to elevate her music, that you are fans of her work. I wanted to know what's brought you to this project. I mean, she is unfortunately long gone, so you didn't get to interview her or spend that time with her like Cheryl or Matthew. But what drew you to this?
Yeah, Rob and I have always been fans of Karen's music, and we had just seen the Townes Van Zandt documentary, Be Here to Love Me, and we were also fans of Townes, and just saw the way that really elevated his music and made it more accessible, and just saw his fan base grow. And we were at a bar one time, and we were sort of bummed that all of Karen's peers were on this jukebox and Karen wasn't. So we set out to make a movie about her and help share her music with the world. And we were very naive at the time and decided we were going to, take 6 months out of our life and take a break from our real jobs and go make this documentary and release it. And that was like 7 years ago now. So it took a lot longer than we expected, but definitely worth it. And in that time, even we've heard Karen's music just like pop into coffee shops, and just her through like Spotify and just the access to music now. We've just seen her fan base grow so much already, which is serendipitous. It's worked out really nice.
Yeah, you have so many.
Sorry, I saw that film in Doc NYC. I got that link, and I was just like, and I think I know a lot about New York art history, but I didn't know her. And then when I heard just all these connections to her, and her music was so amazing. That it's a great film. Sorry, just like I see myself watching it. It was really emotional, and I was already a wreck because I was in that festival. So it was already, and that might have been the first. You get all these links. That was the one I watched. First. I was like, made me really like feel good that you made it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, both your films did play at Doc NYC, and in the midst of a pandemic as well. So I guess that didn't help with only putting 6 months of your life aside, and then you've 7 years later plus a pandemic doesn't help. But with elevating the idea of elevating Karen's music, you really had only archival imagery to work with, Richard and Robert. Can you tell me about that, about unearthing her work? I mean, I feel like there hasn't been very much of it out there. We have, a couple of recordings, but your film really delved deep into, her ephemera. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. I mean, with the footage, it was really difficult because there was a small amount of footage of Karen that existed. And we kind of, going into it, we were pretty certain, we were told by many people that that was all that existed. So we kind of just took the challenge and we're like, no, we can find more. I'm sure we can find more. There's got to be more. There's no way, right? But it was a challenge. I mean, it took a really long time to find that footage. I think we have, how much footage? 15, 20 minutes, maybe tops, 20, 22 minutes of her in the movie. But I think it took 4 or 5 years to find the first sort of unreleased clip of her. And then we just found another piece literally the day we locked the movie. So it wasn't even in the cut of the movie. We're sending it to our distributor and it just pops up. We get an email from our friend Matt from Light in the Attic Records. And he's like, have you seen this? This just popped up. And we're like, oh shit. So then we have to open the edit back up and
It was the exact day that we delivered the film. This new footage popped up on YouTube and it only lasted maybe 2 days. So we knew it existed and had to track it and, incorporate it into the film and re-export and get it back to the distributor and obviously get all the rights and stuff, which takes forever. But it's funny because we've heard that a lot, but we feel like we have such a little amount of archival in the film. It just always felt like there was never enough. And that's why we ended up incorporating her journals and using that as voiceover to try and help it feel like there was a bit more of her and give her a voice in the film. We didn't want to feel like we were the ones only telling her story.
I will say the 7 years was a blessing because without the 7 years that it took to make the movie, we needed that time to acquire the materials that we have. Like if we had went to Doc NYC 2 years ago, then we wouldn't have this new footage in the movie, and we would be kicking ourselves, you know. Like,
Yeah, I mean, like, as a fan of her music, I certainly never seen video footage of any of her appearances. I was amazed. So it's funny that you say that you hear it quite a lot, that there's so much archival footage and you don't feel like there's very much at all. But I guess for the fans at home, there's so much. It's like a treasure trove that you found.
It's great to hear.
yeah, it's nice to hear for sure. I guess we just watch other documentaries and we get a little jealous. We're like, oh, they have so much archival. Like the whole movie's archival, you know? But thank you. Yes,
Yeah.
we appreciate it.
Well, Cheryl, what about you? I mean, Richard and Robert said that, they were working on this for 7 years. You've essentially been working on this film since like 21 years, I suppose.
I don't say that, but I sometimes say 10. I don't say 20.
I just mean from when you started documenting Dash. But
I think that I documented. I really studied art history in school, and I had a really passionate teacher, and I don't know. I had this thing in my brain that, like, just always take pictures and make film of your friends that are artists. Like early in their career, it's a time that is never duplicated, and it's so special. And I just did that, and it wasn't like someday I'm going to make this. I mean. Yeah, I was like, someday I'll do something with this, but I always did that. And I just remember going to like the MoMA once, and they had this recreation of Jackson Pollock's barn. And I forget the guy's name, famous filmmaker who went there, put a piece of plexi on the ground, put his camera there, and filmed this painting being painted on this in front of the lens. And it's just is like priceless to have had that he did that, and so it always stuck in my brain. So yeah, I filmed him, and I filmed tons of friends, and I just have them on mini DV tapes all over the place. But I would say that I went back and looked at the first like treatment I started writing to try to find funding, and it was from 2011. I wasn't physically, that to me, writing is just like the worst, but so I count that as making it, finding money, whatever. But I would say editorially, I don't know, 7, 8, I don't know. It was, rocky roads, yeah. Editors coming and going, me doing it, changing it from Premiere to Avid to Premiere, it's just like mind-boggling. Now my distributor's like, do you have any extras? And I'm like, they're in Avid. Like, once I finished it, I did other things in Premiere. I'm like, I don't even know how to do this anymore. I just wanted to kill myself. But anyway. Yeah,
well, I'm glad that there was a finished product. You say that you've been documenting Dash and your friends and his friends for so long. At what point did that sort of that moment crystallize for you that you wanted to make this particular film?
Well, when he passed, there was a number of people that were coming around New York, like calling friends up and people up saying like, I got money from the French government to make a film about Dash Snow. And we were like, and did you know him? And who are you? Like, a number of instances where people were coming from California and Belgium. And so I said to the friends and, Jade, who has the estate, like, you need to protect this story. Because the first thing that gets in the world is what people think is real, and film is really, really powerful, and you need to protect this. And then it was like sort of deemed that you should make it, and I'm like, oh yeah, okay. I mean, I had the most archival, and it was, again, if you're making a film before cell phones and video on phones, you might, there's not, like, I always also look at films with all just Amy, it's all archival, like, but it was past the year of when people had video cameras in their hands. But if so there was not I had an ample amount, and I also had an ample amount of footage of New York City at that time, because it was 9/11, and I had a studio and home half a block from there, and I filmed. I was homeless. I filmed the street for a year, so it was really fun and rewarding to make it out of my own archival. One, because I'm going to pay somebody else, but also it was more personal, and so that was very exciting to have all that. So this, it was rewarding in that way that I could use all of my footage, a lot of my footage.
Well, I mean, you have delivered a completely different film than someone that has never met Dash, for sure. That relationship that you had with him really comes through beautifully in the film, and it feels like I was living in New York around that time, and he was quite a contentious, controversial figure in the art world, I remember, and this really gave me a new sense of him and his work, which I thought was really important. Was that something that you were considering in the making of your film? In that,
there was like the people that really knew him and loved him, and then there was this persona about him, and there was a lot of haters. And when he passed, there was like crazy trolling, like negative, like mean, from people that never met the guy, so there was a perception. And so I, for one, wanted to, he comes from a very influential family. He's, that's like the Medicis of the United States. But he didn't have that privilege in a lot of times of his life. And he had a pretty tough times. And I also wanted to really, it is kind of half graffiti and half art in a way. I had more footage early when he was younger too. So I wanted to connect those two, because there's the art world that, in a lot of cases, they look to the street to like find the next thing. And they co-opt things that come from the street, things that naturally emerge. Music, art, it comes from the ground up. It doesn't come from the top down. The art world, the Ivy League art world, comes from the top down. So I just wanted to really show those two sides and let people make their own decisions, but really show the person and the kid. And it's about a boy. I had a friend of mine early, at some point I stopped even going out. I'm sure everyone feels this when people say, "What are you doing? What are you working on?" You're like, "Oh, I'm making," and you're like, "Still making that film?" And you're just like, "Oh my God." But I had a friend say, I said, "Oh, I'm making a film about Dash." No. And he's like, "Why?" And an artist. And I was like, "Oh, that's a weird," at first I was offended, because I was like, because I make films, that's my art. Like, why would you say that? But then I was like kind of empowered. I'm just like, it's about a boy. I could be making a film about a boy in Appalachia, and his story is, if it's important to me, I'm going to make that film. Like, to me, it's a film about a boy, a boy, the young man. And, that's enough for me, so anyway.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. Matthew, it's different with you and your film in that, you met Wanita, became embroiled in her story, and started kind of following her, essentially. Can you talk a little bit about the relationship that you have with her? Did you become quite protective of her during the filming process, or were you kind of there in a more kind of observational way?
I don't think Wanita would have ever thought that I was her protector in any way, but I think that I was her I was her documentarian, as Archer calls me. I got the job as the Queen's documentarian, which gave me a fair bit of status in his eyes before that. And I think I was like I keep thinking garbage dump, but that's not the word. receptacle for all her thoughts and all her own kind of self-mythologizing, all her memories, all her phone calls. And so I think, gradually we kind of built this trust where, she just kind of went for it, like let me kind of have everything, and trusted that I would do something with it that would, as she says in the film, she just wanted it to be accurately represented. And so she kind of just let me have a go at that over a long period of time and gave me all the material I needed, including all her self-archive from her own. And it's interesting how Cheryl was saying was a film about a boy, because I kind of felt a lot that I was making a film about like a little girl, because she gave me all her tapes. Like she kept them all from when she was about 8-10 years old, singing country songs into a tape recorder at home. And, she'd sing all the hits from the period of time, and she had singing lessons recorded. And so I just kind of listened to all that stuff and really, I just feel like I was in Edenhope in 1979 or whatever. And so I always felt like I was kind of making the documentary about that little girl, out in the world, woman's body and running around, yeah. I've forgotten the question again. Yeah.
No, that's perfect. Well, I was asking about whether you were protecting kind of her story through your film.
No, I was trying. I don't know if I was trying to protect it. I was just trying to tell all sides of it as best as I could, or we could. In that limited time. It's kind of like she's got her story, and she's really created that story about herself. And she remembers very specific things about her whole past. It's kind of like a bit of a biblical kind of legend in a way, the creation of the Queen of Honky-Tonk. And then you've got the way it actually impacts on all the people around her, like people who are trying to help her, people that she's helping, her husband, her daughter. And so it was always just a matter of trying to tell her story, but also telling the story of the other people and how it all kind of melds together into this. And getting that balance right was the thing that we spent a lot of time trying to get right.
Yeah. Does that ring true for you as well, Richard and Robert, about, making a portrait of Karen Dalton and her life?
Rob was a little bit more protective of there were like a few stories that we debated on telling or not. And he got a little bit more protective. But yeah, we figured it out.
Also with Karen, there's like a little bit of myth around her life, and there are sort of like a lot of stories and like almost like a lot of different versions of the stories. So in certain instances, we were just able to choose our favorite version of the story in a way.
Can you give me an example of that?
It's sort of like, there's the story, I don't know, like the story of her sort of like at the recording studio, and she's trying to like shoot up speed, and like she can't find a vein. And then someone comes in and finds the vein immediately, and she starts convulsing and tears the sink out of the wall, and then goes and does a beautiful harmony. There's like a few different versions of that story, all the same point basically, right? But like, just like the details, the way the different people told them were slightly varied. So we could kind of just choose our favorite sort of version of them.
Yeah, I guess everyone's memory is different. And when you're thinking back on, things that were happening in, we're talking the 1960s here. Of course, there's going to be a few changes from one person to another.
One also actually, how Karen lost her bottom teeth. That was one actually that was up for debate. Like the man she was with at the time, like it's the story about how one boyfriend found her in bed with another boyfriend, or the man she was having an affair with. and a fight broke out and she got in the middle of it and got punched. That's the story. But the boyfriend who she was having an affair with, who eventually became her third husband, says, no, I don't remember her getting hit in the mouth. Like she got hit in the forehead or something, you know? But then her daughter says, no, she got hit in the mouth. It was the mouth for sure. So
it's interesting, like, you know, things happening so long ago, but how specifically people could remember things incorrectly. Like they would be so decisive about something, and then we'd interview somebody else the next day, and they would totally contradict everything that the person the day before said. Where they were like, in 1964, I was living with Karen in LA, and someone else was like, yeah, I lived with Karen in LA in 1964 in Boston, and you're just like, wait, what? Like she was not in both places at the same time. But everybody's so specific about it, and so like they are confident in delivering their facts to you.
I was really impressed with the amount of interviews in your film, and that you spoke to so many different people from very different stages of her life, including a lot of the women in her life, particularly when she'd taken herself out of the city and had built up this kind of kinship with her neighbours. I just wanted to know about, if you had any thoughts on how you went looking for those interviews, whether you were trying to create a very well-rounded, I'm sure you were, view of her life, or whether there were these particular moments or kind of crystallized moments of her life that you wanted to speak about in the film.
There are definitely certain parts of her life we knew we wanted to cover for sure. Like we knew we wanted to cover like the early Greenwich Village time period, and then like her sort of mid to late 60s time in Colorado, and then after that is when it kind of got tricky, where we sort of had to, it was almost like just getting introductions through other people, and we had to sort of find that stuff, that sort of post second album, like mid to late 70s through the rest of her life, because she did bounce around so much at that point. So we kind of, at that point, it was almost kind of who we could find that was still alive from that part of her life, really. We got lucky because we did find some people who knew her very well.
We knew like there were the myths about Karen, and like we obviously wanted to talk about her music, but we through some of these friends and like side characters really wanted to know like who Karen was as a person, and just like the things that we didn't know about Karen, I think is what we got like most obsessed about. And as we started to uncover more and more about like who she was as a person, we got more excited and tried to find more of these people that could tell us about like how she baked beans and like how she was as like a host of a potluck and like that sort of thing. We got like really excited about that stuff because that was what we thought like was missing on Wikipedia and places that you could find on the web.
Were most people that you sought out keen to speak about Karen, or were others kind of reticent to speak about her life or their relationships?
They wanted us to make a documentary about them. They're making a movie about Karen. They're like, what about me? I played music back then.
Every answer almost to most questions was, well, this reminds me of this one time when I was in Mexico, and this man said to me, it took work to get people for sure, because they'd been, they felt like they talked it to death at times, some of them, and they didn't want to revisit it. Like also, you know, she didn't leave a lot of her relationships on great terms. So they were reluctant to talk. It took work. It wasn't hard, but it took hard work, right? Persistence, for sure.
Like we started making the documentary before like Spotify or some of those things that really popularized Karen, and Rob had called. We found out where Karen's daughter worked, and it was this restaurant bar, and Rob called up the bar and got Abby and was asking her about like wanting to do this documentary, and she told Rob like oh, no one's going to want to watch that movie. People have tried before, like, you know, not interested, and we just were persistent and you know, kept calling her and flew down and met her, and now she's like one of our best buds. Like we like hang out with her and love her, and but it took a while, and she likes the movie now, and I think like through some of these avenues where it's easier to listen to music is she gets excited about, you know, hearing Karen out on the radio and things like that.
She's definitely more openly proud about
than when we started.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Oh, that's great to hear because her interviews are incredible. She speaks really frankly about what Karen was like as a mother, as well as, you know, this kind of legendary folk hero. And in fact, all three of the films we're talking about today, there are daughters involved. And at least in your film, Karen Dalton, In My Own Time, and I'm Wanita, there are daughters who have very complicated feelings about their mothers. Kind of Dash's daughter is not quite old enough in the film to speak about it. But yeah, I did want to talk about that, about the kind of procuring those interviews and I mean, that must have been very sensitive. What about with you, Matthew, with Wanita's daughter? She gives some great interviews in the film, but you get the sense that she doesn't really, you know, perhaps this is not something that she really wants to be speaking about.
Yeah, she gave us just Ellie Mae. She, you know, she's a supporter of Wanita, and she obviously understands Wanita. She just gave us a few kind of moments. She didn't want to be involved, but she also did believe that the documentary was a worthwhile thing to do, and she wanted Wanita's story to be told as it really happened. And so I guess she knew that her perspective was really important for that. And across the 7 years that we filmed, Ellie Mae just gave us one interview, and they actually span like 3 years, and you can see her developing as a young lady she's 19 in the first one, which she just kind of gave us right at the end of the first shoot. She said that she'd planned to kind of be a bit bullshitty or put on a persona or something. But the second she started talking, all this kind of stuff came out. And that was a really valuable interview for the film. And then there was just a second one when she was about 23, where she really kind of, you know, she let rip. And we certainly didn't use everything in the footage, but she's totally respectful of her mum, but she just needs to keep her distance, and she's just kind of finding her own way. And then she gave us one more at the end, and then she pretty much said, I'm done. I don't want anything more to do with this. And so, yeah, just very appreciative that she, you know, trusted us with her kind of perspective on things. Because it adds heaps to the film.
It really does. And I imagine in some ways it could be cathartic in some way to be able to speak so openly and honestly about your mother, who is mythologized and mythologizes herself for sure. I guess with Karen Dalton as well, the daughter would have heard so much about her mum and has so many things that she would be working through at the same time. Do you think that there was a level of catharsis for her?
Yeah, I do. I don't know if it came through her interview or more like the process of the movie coming out. I think once the movie came out and she realized that there was that people did love Karen's music, I think it kind of made her feel more comfortable with their relationship.
Mm.
With the interview, she's very forthright. Like, she will not sugarcoat anything. But there is also this level, she's sort of protected too. Like, she sort of has her guard up almost always. And it took a while for her to sort of let her guard down. I think, and we even went back for a follow-up with her because of that. And I've sort of meandered away from the question.
It sort of felt like when we first got there, it felt like we were interviewing Karen. Like she sounded like Karen when we heard tapes of Karen talking, and just sort of she looked like her in the way she carried herself, and just like the way she was so direct with us about everything, and has a really fun sense of humor also. Like, it was, I think, especially the first time, it was really shocking to us. I felt like we were meeting Karen, which was an interesting situation to be in there.
Now it feels like you're hanging out with Karen, I'm sure.
Yeah.
What
She
about
really
with
has
you?
to go around, though.
Sorry.
Abby is like almost a totally different person at this point with us. Sorry to interrupt you.
Oh, no, not at all. That's great to know. Cheryl, what about with you? I mean, you were so kind of entrenched in Dash's world. It was your world as well. Did you find that people were keen to talk? I mean, you have archival footage of people talking about his work and him and their world at the time, but there are also subsequent interviews talking about his legacy. Did you find that people, his friends and colleagues, wanted to speak about him?
It was very complicated. Because when he passed, there was like this kind of unspoken, like, nobody talk. Like, press was trying to come around, and it was just like, because the circumstances were unknown, really, and sad, and drugs and whatever. And so by the time that I embarked on it, like, I had been just kind of putting feelers out for anyone that might have footage while I was trying to get my funding and get the deal cooking. And so, then word got back to some people in the graffiti crew. They're like, "You making the film? You didn't ask me. I was his best friend." Like, everyone was like, loved him so much, and everyone thought that they were his best friend. And then they had not really unloaded all their feelings about him, So it was kind of like, what are you going to make? What it's going to be like? I'm just like, I personally don't need any of you guys to make this film because he's a visual artist and he takes the time, I have all this footage, so I want to have your voice, but it was like gangster. It was like, let's have a meeting in this hotel and like, what are you going to, because it's graffiti guys, it's a lot of graffiti guys and it's gangster. And so I felt like I was in Goodfellas sometimes, but then like, if I got this guy to agree, then this guy would agree, then that guy would agree. It was like a kind of weird domino effect. And then, so leading up was like intense. And then when really gave me the most hard time, it was super lovely. And I think a lot of it was just, you are a therapist as a filmmaker, you are a friend, you're all these things once you're on set with someone and they're telling you this stuff and crying and whatever else, and I'm crying and they're crying, and it was just, it was many levels of like hesitancy, very extreme emotions on every single direction. So when it actually hit Doc NYC, I was just like, in a way, yes, it's disappointing to not have a physical festival, but also I was just like, kind of afraid. And so that week, as it went by, like when the core crew saw it, most people texted me and called me and were really happy that I made it and really happy about it. So, but I you have no idea when you make a film and it incorporates like a whole community of people in the town that you live in, like it's my town. So I'm just like walking around like this, like someone, anything could happen. And so that was a really stressful and then also very rewarding week to like finally get it in the world and have that feedback. And also that someone said, it was kind of fitting that you got a link and watched it in your bedroom in a shitty, cold New York City, like fall, and had this intimate experience with your friend that you like missed. So some friends said, I was like, thank you so much. I got to spend 90 minutes with my friend that I love, like sitting on the couch, so, that's enough for me, in the end.
I think that some of the most touching interviews in the film are definitely with his previous partners and wives. Were they always keen to be involved in this project, or was that something that you kind of pushed for, or can you tell me a bit about the relationship there?
Well, Agathe was his partner for a long time, and she also had, they were, even though they weren't together, they were just really close and really connected. And then Jade, they were totally in love and had a child, and so both Agathe and Jade were, very helpful and very, very pro for the project, definitely. Yeah. And I think that, and I think the film also kind of made them closer in a way, having coming together to tell that shared story,
Yeah, they speak so with so much love, but also, it's a very complex situation, of course, that everyone's coming from in your film. But it was beautiful to hear.
He loved women. He loved, he also was like, would be best friends with some 80-year-old dude on the street, and then he'd be then he'd go to some party with Mick Jagger. He had no ageism. He had no, he was so magnetic and open and inviting to everyone, every kind of person. And I think that, I think that, he had difficult family issues, and I think that he was always looking for love, nurturing kind of love, and I think maybe me and my husband, were generations older than him, but I could speak. I was a fan of his teenage graffiti thing, and I knew the talk, but I was an older woman that was nurturing and. I think he needed stuff like that. He needed that feeling of safety, sometimes. And he sought it out with the women in his life,
There's something in your film, Matthew, where I think it's Archer, who is a musician who plays with Wanita, says that something about being with your own kin. And I feel that is very much relevant to all of your films, that there are these sort of troubled artists, really powerful, unique, charismatic people in the world, who all instinctively sought out their own kin, from Karen leaving the city to live in the mountains, Dash forming this community, sleeping in the nest, etc. There is so much community there. But what about with Wanita, Matthew? It's interesting because she's the only figure here that is alive. Do you feel that she has kind of found her kin, or is that something that she's always searching for?
You actually combined two quotes there from the film, which was pretty good. One was from Wanita talking about her mum, saying that one day you're going to be with people of your own kind, and another one is Archer saying sometimes it's nice to have kin around you, when he's talking about why he's in America with her. Has she found her own kind? Is that what her own kin?
Yeah, is that something that she's that you found, because you were on the road with her, and as Cheryl said, as a filmmaker, you're a therapist, an observer, etc. Was that your experience on the road with her?
Similar to what Cheryl was talking about, ageism and different levels of celebrity or whatnot. Wanita's very much the same as that. She makes friends very, very quickly, and she's drawn to people who are struggling or people who have been through something, And we saw her many times, like zero in on someone and kind of reduce them to tears within about 30 seconds because she'd go straight to their major wound or something. She had this ability, and she makes friends very, very quickly. I think it's the longer maintenance of friendships or business partnerships that she kind of struggles with because I don't know. I mean, she just likes to do things quickly and now, and it takes a very, very strong person to stand up against that. But I think she's still finding her own kin, yeah. I mean, she surrounds herself in people all the time, and she says she only wants to be famous and make money from music so she can open a big house and have everyone come and she can take care of everyone. She feels herself when she's like cooking hot, food for everyone and taking care of people, and when she's on stage being the queen of Honky-Tonk there, that's just how she wants to be all the time. So if she can, and she's still moving towards that because it takes a lot of money for starters to take care of hundreds of people and everyone who shows up at your door who need food and cigarettes and petrol and everything. So she's still, on her way, I think.
Well, yeah, I think she's referred to in the film, perhaps by Archer, as a drunk Mother Teresa. So that sounds accurate like from that. What you're saying. I bet. Yeah. So
she said, "Lose the drunk bit, just Mother Teresa." Yeah.
So let's talk about her reactions to the film as well. I mean, because you are in the unique position of she will see this work and has seen it. Was she nervous about certain things for you to use, or did she ask you to, did she want a sense of control over it, I imagine?
No, she didn't. No, she did not say anything ever about not using anything ever. And we didn't show her the film until we had it it was fine cut, until we really kind of thought we were almost there, which was kind of took 9-10 months. And she was shitting herself when she came to watch it. And she watched it, and I did feel like a chill go through the room at a couple of moments. But the thing that she really got upset about, which we didn't see coming at all, was the fact that we blamed completely the kind of failure of the Sun studio session on her drunkenness, and we hadn't mentioned that musician in the band that wasn't up to speed, that really distracted her. And that was the thing. That was the thing that she got most upset about. And I think that was to do with her. I think she, really stands on her professionalism when it comes to music, and so that was the thing that offended her most. She didn't have any problem with anything Ellie Mae said. She just loved Ellie Mae. Her and Glennie, a couple of things Glennie said upset her a little bit. And she did go into she had a nervous breakdown, she said, after watching it. But she went into a bit of a spiral. But she kind of it just wasn't what she was expecting, I guess. And so it just took a while for her to kind of absorb it. But she very much came to peace with it, and she really is very proud of it now.
Well, it does feel like a very truthful portrait of someone. It captures all of her struggles that she's very open about. And, the fact that she has, been working as a sex worker for so long to help buoy her own music career. Like she's very upfront about everything. She seems to me like a documentarian's dream in that way. But there are complications, I imagine, that come with that, and sensitivities.
Yeah. Complications in the edit, for sure. But she takes it as a challenge. If someone wants her to be more open, she kind of raises the stakes. And, you want to talk about that, do you? Okay, well, blah, 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 blah. And it's almost like how open can you be? How much can you own your own story and not be ashamed or, yeah.
With your film, Rich and Robert, did you have do you ever think of that as directors? Do you ever think, what would Karen think of this, or that you are portraying her in a particular light? Is that in the back of your mind, or are you first and foremost, making a film about this icon?
I mean, you always kind of think about it a little bit, but it's like we even say in the movie, I think someone says I don't want to excessively imagine that you can interpret the fragments of Karen's life. So I think I just made a rule. I was like, I'm never going to try to imagine what Karen would say or think, essentially. And it's easier that way. Yeah. So of course you think about it, but not too much. You can't overthink it. Cause
I think we did more so in the beginning. We definitely were thinking about her and Abby a lot when we were making the film, and trying to make something that we thought Karen would like, and didn't want it to be this puff piece about Karen either. We wanted it to feel very real and true to her, and she's a very strong person. And we're thinking about those aspects about it a lot when we were making it.
Mm. What about you, Cheryl? I mean, you were, you knew Dash so well. Were you kind of just most interested in portraying an authentic portrait, I suppose, of Dash? Was that something that you could even entertain, the idea of what would Dash think of this film?
He would probably want it to be more gnarly, I think. I mean, I did pull back, things and things. There's a very sensitive family story here that I tell you, it's not my story to tell, and that's another film. I really wanted to be his story. Yeah, he came from this place and that, but what is he about? And I feel like as a visual artist, and you talk about the sensitivity and the crazy stories. I mean, I believe you can't if you're a great artist, you are so open and so vulnerable in other ways, because you have to be so close to the edge to make work that moves people. And with that comes a shell perhaps that you don't have. And that's why a lot of artists don't survive, past a certain point because of that. So, his story, also, everybody knows you got 90 minutes to tell a story. There's a million ways to tell it. There's tons of stuff that you maybe was in there, but now is out, or whatever. You just have to pick the path, and hopefully you do the due diligence, and you have 20 billion thousand versions, and you finally call it. So I think that he. It has a lot of his art in it. So to me, that's his voice, as more of an adult, developed, artist. And he has his real voice and image in it when he's young. And so it's as close as I think he would of his story that I could tell. I mean, I'm sure you can always do things better, but that's what was my aim, to really, make it in his words. And if he's talking about something that might be negative or disturbing, it's coming from his mouth, not somebody else's story about him or his family. It's his words. So, but I was very conscious of that. Yeah. So I don't know. I'm sure he wouldn't like it, but I mean, he says in the film, I'm not embarrassed about anything I ever did. When he talks about Larry Clark. So, he would probably want it all in there, but it's not all in there, out of consideration for his daughter and things like that. Yeah,
of course. There's something that is said in your film, Matthew, that really kind of rang true for all of the people depicted in your films at this panel. Wanita's late husband at one point says, I'm paraphrasing, but either something's missing or she has something extra. And I thought that was such a kind of incredible statement about an artist in general. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on that idea of, an artist in particular, depicting artists as something missing or something extra.
That's kind of why we kept that line for right at the end, because it kind of summed up everything, and summed up everything about their relationship as well, because Baba is very practical, and he's concerned with money, and he's concerned with plans and what's going to happen next, and Wanita's just she's responding to these feelings that make her do things. And I just listened to her the other night on an interview, and she said, I drove to Mount Isa to pick someone up. She says she feels like a hand comes down and says, you must do this now. And that's really financially kind of devastating. So I guess that's the thing. It just doesn't make sense, but she's compelled,
Mm. Can you relate to that idea, Cheryl, Richard, or Robert? The idea of portraying an artist in that particular light?
I think, most artists, it's a great way to sum up almost any artist. Most artists have something missing in some way, shape, or form, but also something extra. I totally agree with that statement. I think it's...
I love that.
Very poignant statement. I mean, especially with Karen. I mean, I think part of why we actually wanted to make the movie, because the way Karen was sort of perceived was like this way. She was always perceived in this way where there was something missing, like she did something wrong, but that's not how we saw it. I think we saw it more in a way where it wasn't like it's not that she wasn't able to make it. It's just like maybe we just weren't ready for what she had yet or something like that. And I think, I agree with that statement very much.
Yeah, there's a sense of lost potential with Karen in particular, in that that was also that self-sabotage in a way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, of course, it's so hard to say. I mean, she made decisions. It wasn't like she was like stumbling through her life or anything. I think she stood behind her decisions too, whether they were the right decisions for her at the time. You can't say whether they were right or wrong or whatever that means. But
we talk a lot about timing in the film, and just like Karen always being slightly off. Like when she was deliberately making these decisions, but it always felt like her timing was just always slightly off throughout her life.
If in that statement in regards to Dash, I think, he was abducted out of his bedroom as a 12-year-old and sent to this lockup boarding school, which was incredibly abusive for being, a teenager, wild teenager. I wasn't there. I don't know why. But then he comes back to New York. So he's reprimanded for being this wild kid who he is. And then he comes back to New York and is celebrated for being a wild kid, becomes notorious for climbing onto the Brooklyn Bridge and writing "Fuck Giuliani" in everyone that lived in New York before 9/11, we knew the real deal of him, and now we know the real deal of him now. But, so he was like, oh yeah, he took everything that he was told to repress and denied in this boarding school and just went the extreme the other way. Because this place was like, they couldn't listen to music. They couldn't have any individuality. They read censored books. So literally books with like subversive words cut out of them. So I love this visual of him then making art out of scooping up these subversive words and collaging and making collages out of it, because it was all this stuff for 3 years of his teen years that he was like, that was repressed and denied, and that became his art and his persona, So whether that was a little too much or something missing. I mean, he did think he walked on sides of buildings, and that's, fear of death maybe is missing. But yeah, I love that statement though. It's amazing.
It is a great statement. Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking now in relation to Karen too, I think you kind of summed it up pretty nicely when you were talking about Dash. It's like looking back, during Karen's career, what we were calling mistakes is what she is like celebrated for now. When people, the things they said she did wrong at the time are why we love her now. So I think that's like something's missing or something's extra. That to me is kind of how it relates to Karen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Can that be the title of this panel?
Yes.
Baba would be happy.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today and for your exquisite films. I feel that, I've really got to know these three very unique, extremely charismatic individuals through your films, and they're kind of gifts to people who are familiar with, the work of Karen, Dash, or Wanita, and also kind of beautiful capsules of particular times that speak to the times that they were living in, but also all the people and communities that they were all attached to. I think that it's a bit of a fantasy dinner party for me now after speaking to all of you. Imagine having dinner with Dash, Wanita, and Karen. Beautiful.
He would love it. He would love it. He wanted to be a musician.
Thank you so much for joining me on today's panel. I hope everyone goes out and sees Moments Like This Never Last, I'm Wanita, and Karen Dalton in My Own Time at MIFF this year. You can find out more about the MIFF program and all the other talks that we're doing as well at miff.com.au. Thank you so much for your time and your films.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having
us, MIFF.
Thank you.
It was very fun.